Welcome, advocates, to another episode of the Leading Equity Podcast, a podcast that focuses on supporting educators with the tools and resources necessary to ensure equity at their schools. Today's special guest is Dr. Kelly Davenport. So without further ado, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here, Sheldon.
Pleasure is all mine. I'm excited for today's conversation. We got some stuff, folks, that's going to really help you out when we're thinking about an asset-based approach to education. So before we get into the topic, Kelly, I'd love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you currently do.
Well, I loved, Sheldon, an episode you had just recently with Dr. Shamari Reed. He introduced himself as human. So I want to say I'm a human first. I'm a white woman. I have been a career educator. And for the last 24 years, I've had the privilege of co-founding the first school and then founding 3 other schools in Philadelphia and Wilmington, Delaware that serve kids that self-identify predominantly as kids of color and kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch and who lived in predominantly underserved neighborhoods. So those kids are really who I am. That is me, other than my own 2 kids that I have at home.
All right, well, let's get into it because the name of your school is Freire and Freire Schools, and I always try to pronounce his last name as best as possible. I sometimes butcher it, but when I got excited because I knew we were going to be talking, I went ahead and grabbed my copy, Pedagogy of the President, as I spoke to you earlier before we even started recording. That is my favorite education book, beside my own book. That is my favorite education book of all time. So tell us, what are some of the philosophies that were pulled from his work and how that relates to what we're doing at your school?
Pronouncing his name is really hard. You're right. The first day of our first year, our kids came to our board meeting and helped us decide how we were going to pronounce the name of the school. So we pronounce it Freire. That's not how you pronounce it in Portuguese. But the kids really decided how to pronounce that. And before that, they were saying Ferry and Ferrari and all kinds of crazy things. So it's Freire Schools. And the basic principles that we pulled from the book, which is also one of my favorite books, is that, Paulo Freire says that true education begins when we reconcile the power imbalance between teacher and student relationship. So that is inherently sort of flawed. And as we go through this podcast, I'll sort of point out some of the places where I see that. But our vision, and Freire also says this, is that kids can learn as much from teachers as teachers can learn from kids. And it's that one-to-one experience in true form where real learning happens. Now, I'm not trying to say that teachers need to give up authority or the responsibility to build lesson plans or to do what's right for kids by any means. But in the classroom, Paulo Freire said that the power imbalance is such that a teacher tries to pour knowledge into a child's head like they're an empty vessel. Or his vernacular is to bank knowledge into a child's head. And I submit to you, in my educational experience, that doesn't work. Our kids come as full human beings. They have past, presence, they have experiences and hopes and dreams and emotions, and you can't just open up their head and pour anything into that. You have to motivate them, connect with them, join them. And that is what I believe Freire means by reconciling the power imbalance between teacher and student. So at our schools, we're really trying to work on building a culture where teachers learn from kids learn from teachers. There's still plenty of authority and discipline going on, but when kids need help, they have voice. They can reach out and say, hey, I need help with that, or can I do that again? So we call it the culture of asking for and receiving help. Freire also talks about just reading, that students need to learn how to read the word and the world together. And I think that's where we marry this idea of the power structure. Why do we think that kids don't understand that teachers have more power than students, or try to be sort of coy about that rather than being honest about what the power structures are and how kids use their own power to advocate for themselves, to get in there and get what they need as learners? So that's really what we're trying to do at the Freire Schools.
There's a lot that I could pull from that response. And I think at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that we can learn just as much from our students as we teach them. The challenge that I hear a lot of teachers say is, well, I'm a math teacher, my students don't know the math that I'm teaching them. How can I learn from them if I'm supposed to teach them this math equations and all these things? What kind of response do you give if you get that kind of pushback, Kelly?
Well, I was a Spanish teacher by trade for 9 years. I think similar to math or any subject, what you can learn from your kids is who they are,
Mm-hmm.
how they learn, where they struggle, whatever misconceptions they had about math prior to coming into your classroom, and then how to really connect the math to each individual's experiences, needs, visions, self-identity, those kind of things. I'm not suggesting that we interrupt math. I'm suggesting that there is a dance that needs to go on between the teacher and the student that's authentic and it's human. And inside of that, math gets taught. And I would say that that's how actually math gets taught to all students at a faster rate.
So it's not necessarily that we're expecting our students to teach us, to put it as basic, okay, Spanish, for example, for us to learn from our students how to communicate, but we are learning what they're interested in, what their background is. So we have to look at it from that sense as opposed to just thinking, oh, our students are actually teaching us the concepts or the context of the content, but we're actually learning from them as far as the human being side of things.
Yes, the arrow can't just go one way. It
Yeah.
can't just be that teacher is impounding knowledge into a student's head. It just doesn't work like that. There's a relationship that has to occur. And I think that's really what we're talking about, is that relationship.
Yeah. I like that. Okay. So you mentioned the part of students have voice, and we're providing a space for our students to express themselves. For example, maybe they took a test and they didn't do as good as they could have done the first time they took it. And often in our traditional school settings, we grade it, and then we move on to the next concept, and whatever grade they got, that's what grade they got. But you and I were kind of talking before we started recording about there's something a little bit different approach that you take when it comes to maybe assessments for our students. Could you share?
Our idea is that in a standards-based education system, which our nation adopted in the early 2000s, the idea is that every student needs to meet a certain standard. And I will say that not every student is going to meet that standard at the same time. In other words, Unit 3 algebra test, let's say that's on polynomials. Well, the test is on March 14th. That doesn't mean that every student is going to do well on that test or understand or meet that standard by March 14th. In the power of yet, students take the test on March 14th, and let's say they don't do so well, that then they can advocate for and ask for a redo on that test down the road. The idea being that every student can meet the standard over time, and that some need a little bit more time. And students say, well, I just haven't met it yet. I haven't met that standard yet, but I'm getting there. And our job as educators is to provide those opportunities. Now, we have found practically you can't do that with every single assignment. So mastery assignments are the assignments where students can ask to retake a test. And just the other week, I was asking students about the power of yet, and they love that opportunity for themselves. So do parents. And what students have said to me are things like, you know what, I took the test the first time and I didn't understand the directions. Or one girl said to me, my mother was in the hospital and dying, and I had to take a math test and I wasn't ready. Another student said, I needed to sit down with my teacher and really go over the material again because I thought I understood it and I didn't. And Sheldon, when we think about the world we're preparing our kids for, which is what school is about, it's about knowing where your resources are, so that when you don't do something right the first time, or you mess it up, or you just still don't get it, you can go and figure it out. It's that skill of advocacy and resilience that I think is just as important as the math that we're trying to build inside of our students.
So are they taking the exact same assessment?
Most times, no. It will be the same
Okay.
standard in some other form. And I think that's really important to say, because I appreciate you asking that. We're asking our teachers to do more here. In a way, I want to just name that to be true. And I think our teachers are incredible already for the work they do, and there's more here for them. And our schools of education don't prepare our teachers for this mindset of that kids being able to do it again. Just like traditional school, elementary school, traditional school does not prepare our students for this kind of mindset either. And so like we're asking something different. ironically, that will actually help our kids in the real world outside of school than what the present system is. And bottom line, when we allow a student to fail a test and we don't address it, what are we saying to kids? That we don't think they can do it, or that they're sort of almost learners, or they're almost getting there, but they're not there yet? And so I think this opens up a dialogue too about performance expectations, supports, self-advocacy that I find really helpful in the classroom.
At the end of the day, I think the question for me, the question should always be, is this grade, does it provide an accurate representation of what a student has mastered or not? Right? Because like you said, we're human beings first. Kids are humans. They deal with stuff at school. They deal with all these different things. And sometimes they're distracted, sometimes those things. Or they just didn't understand it the first time it was explained to them. That happens, right? Sometimes you explain it to them multiple different ways, and it's that third way that you explained it. Oh, boom, I get it. Oh, shoot, you should have started with that, So those kind of things happen. But when we give them a grade, and again, the child, for whatever reason, didn't do their best, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have an accurate representation of that grade that they have. So it makes sense to me if a child 2 weeks later says, you know what, I want to try this again, or, I've done some tutoring or whatever it is, my life situation is better. I want to take this opportunity to try again. To me, that makes more sense. Why do you think that's not a concept that a lot of us are doing? Like, why is that not a thing, I guess, in most schools?
I think it comes down to the factory model of how
Mhm.
our schools were built. And when you think about just the number of kids that a teacher has in his or her classroom and the
Mhm.
amount of work it takes every day. I founded these schools. I am the CEO of these schools, but I will tell you, being a teacher for 9 years was harder than that. It's the
Yeah.
hardest job I've ever done. And so I think the grammar or rigid sort of traditional structure of school is easier to go through because nobody has time to question it
Yeah.
or to change it while we are still
Mhm.
educating kids.
Mhm.
And that's sad to me, which is the opportunity that I had to open new schools and to start again and to rethink some of how the structure of that needs to be. Like, that's been a privilege of mine, not everybody gets. And this one concept I think is so incredibly important to that self-image of student. And again, teacher has to be willing to do that. So I give teachers a lot of credit, especially
Yeah.
our teachers, for being willing.
Shout out to the educators that are able to give children another chance.
Agreed.
That's at the end of the day. Shout out to those who are able to do that. I know some teachers will do extra credit assignments, and I know I had a guest on not too long ago where he talks about where extra credits can often be what's this camp. Camp was my guest not too long ago, and he talked about how extra credit sometimes can be inequitable because maybe one teacher gives the extra credit, the other teacher does not. Same class, but one has an opportunity. One class set of roster has extra chances, while the other class does not have those extra chances, just because the teacher isn't willing to do the same type of extra credit. Which kind of leads me to my next question: is this like your model? Is it school wide? Meaning, like, if you have multiple English teachers, are they all providing those opportunities for students to retake a test or, get that extra support? Is that something that's pretty standard professed throughout the school?
Yes, we have middle school and high school. So our middle schoolers call it the power of yet,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a little bit of a different structure than our high schoolers who call it multiple opportunities for mastery, or MOM, they call it. And so, but it's the same thing. Kids have to put in a request or an appeal to be able to take something again, be able to articulate what's going to be different this time and why. Then they're given an opportunity to take that test again. It has to be a mastery assignment. And then if they do better, their grade improves. And I also want to say, like in Singapore, for example, who's
Yeah.
beating the pants off of us
Yeah.
academically, in Singapore, we take our strongest and best teachers and place them with the kids who need more time and support to learn something. We don't say, oh, well, you who didn't master it at the time that I had preordained, you cannot learn that. We give up on you. We're moving on to the next thing. We reallocate resources to those who need it the most and make sure those are the best resources. And while I can't do that every day in our schools and hope that all of our teachers are really strong, what I can do is make sure the kids have adequate amount of supports and time to prove themselves in a particular subject area. I set our schools up on an XY axis, high expectations, rigorous curriculum, and high level of supports to help any and every student through that rigorous curriculum. I had a student once, maybe 10 years ago, tell me that, oh, Miss Kelly, I understand exactly what you're saying about high expectations. It's like my grandmother says, we, all of us, you, me, we are all like fleas in a jar, he said, which I had no idea what that meant. And he said, my grandmother says that if you put actual fleas in a jar, that they will only jump high enough once to hit their head. So if they jump and they hit their head on the top of the lid, that they will recalibrate. And from that day forward, they will never jump any higher because they do not want to hit their head on the top of that lid. And what the student was telling me was that, oh, your high expectations are because we are all fleas in a jar. And we have to keep the expectations high or we will start to recalibrate and lower our own expectations. I think in science, that's called entropy. And support, so while your expectations are high, your supports are there too. So the power of yet is one of those supports. Another one that we offer in our school system is that we provide one-on-one individual therapy from emotional therapists who do family therapy, one-on-one therapy to our kids every day at all of our campuses. And what happens is about 28% of our kids on any given day are getting one-on-one individualized therapy support. So that's another way that we are working to build a culture of asking for and receiving help, where kids who need extra help. I mean, look, on a random survey every year, our kids take this test where it assesses what sort of adverse childhood experiences our kids have been through. And since COVID, Sheldon, that number has skyrocketed.
Yeah.
So 30% of our incoming ninth graders on this anonymous survey have experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. That could be incarceration, drug overdose, sexual abuse, violence, any of those things. Our kids experiencing them or witnessing somebody in their house experiencing them. So our kids come full of so many things, so much hardship. But again, that resilience that we're trying to build, that voice that Paulo Freire imagined, or as you and I said, that relationship, so that when we get to the math classroom, our kids are ready to do math.
Yeah.
They can like open up a piece of their hearts and minds and learn about algebraic expression. Otherwise, they're full of something else potentially. And how would we know unless we created that space for kids?
Well, how did you create a space? Because a lot of folks will say, oh, I don't have the funding to provide. Now, do you have traditional school counselors or do you have like mental health specialists, or is there like, tell us a little bit more about that?
Thank you for that question. So we do not have traditional school counselors.
Okay.
We blew that up into a 3-pronged counseling process in our schools. So from the economics, the question about how does that get funded?
Mm-hmm.
We are lucky to be in Philadelphia region where there are many universities who have family therapy programs, masters of family therapy. So we have certified family therapists on our staff, not many. We pay those folks.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are interns in family therapy at University of Pennsylvania or Drexel University or Temple University who are becoming fully certified family therapists and have to do their hours of experience in the field. And so they work full time for us. And in exchange, our certified family therapists support our up and coming family therapists. And those up and coming family therapists work on our team, seeing kids one-on-one all day long. And so that way it's almost cost neutral. The second kind of counseling support is what we call academic advising, which is having our academic advisors help link our students and their families to the supports we offer, such as the power of yet, so that if a student is not doing well in something, an academic advisor's job is to review grades and talk with students and families and teachers and make sure the linkages are happening so that kids are taking advantage of the power of yet, or our after school centers where kids are getting one-on-one help from peers or from adults, or they're going to family therapy with somebody who can help them with whatever's going on for them sort of at home in a hardship kind of way. So that's the second kind of counselor we have. And the third is a college counselor, because our mission and vision is that every and any kid can go to college or do something similar. And then we want to make sure we have adults in the building who are helping to get our kids onto the next road, whatever that is. In fact, of our 300 graduates last year, 151 colleges, individual colleges accepted them for $24 million of scholarships. So college, whatever's next for kids, I believe can be attained by anybody, as long as the school has high expectations, rigorous supports, kids are working hard and believe they have fire in their bellies and believe they can get to wherever it is they want to go next.
Wow. So just the levels of mental health support that you have there, and you said there's multiple. So I know sometimes we'll just have just a school counselor and that's it. And again, funding is often an issue, and that school counselor might be like a 500-to-1 ratio at that level as well. But it sounds like you have multiple layers of support for students, and obviously that shows that it works, because you just said, $24 million worth of scholarship opportunities for your graduating class. I mean, so that does work. Is this something that was like when you founded the school, was that part of the very beginning, or is this something where partnerships kind of developed over time, or something happened to where it's like, you know what, maybe we need to try to partner with or bring in some more support for students? Or how did all that come about?
For the first school, our co-founder, his name is Alphonse Pignataro, and he is a certified family therapist, and he built this program with the local universities right
Mhm.
away. I don't think I said it clearly enough a couple minutes ago, but when we have our intern family therapist working with our students, that's cost
Mhm.
neutral. We don't
Mhm.
pay for that. We are giving an opportunity. Now, these are younger family therapists and they're growing, but they're also being mentored by Alphonse and his team of certified family therapists. So that was built from the fabric on day one into our community. The power of yet has evolved over time. I mean, we all as educators have heard about the growth mindset
Mhm.
versus a fixed mindset, or as you said at the beginning, asset-based teaching.
Mhm.
So wrestling with that over time, this has been the best manifestation that we have come up with inside a traditional and rigorous academic environment to allow kids to prove themselves over time.
Nice. I love this method. And I like to ask you a question, because I mean, obviously, sounds like, I mean, there's always room for growth, but it sounds like what you have going on right now is pretty established at some point. But I know that there's maybe school leaders right now, or there's some teachers right now that are listening and thinking to themselves, wow, what we're hearing it sounds amazing. What are some things that I can do maybe tomorrow, or maybe something that we can work towards at our school? What kind of tips or strategies could you give to our listeners out there who, again, loving what they're hearing, but they don't have the infrastructure set up? What kind of tips or tools would you give out to those who are listening to this?
One of my favorite experiences in graduate school at University of Pennsylvania when I was in my doctorate was a professor who would bring his mail. He was a principal at a local high school, and he would bring his mail from his mailbox to class. And he would read out loud what the letter was. And then it would either go into his do something with it or his trash can
Mhm.
pile. And what I learned there was profound, I think, that there's so much in public education that's noise, and trying to figure out where the noise is and make sure the noise goes in the trash can or strategically gets assigned a small portion of your day so that the things that really matter, like the grammar of school and making sure that kids have voice and get opportunities like the ones I'm talking about, can play a higher and better part of your day than what goes in sort of your mailbox on the day to day. Remember too that like school was sort of made up. We made up school. We made up the Carnegie unit. We created this thing called the Carnegie unit, which has not served our kids, in my opinion, especially our kids of color, especially our kids who are coming from places of poverty or under-resourced environments or hardship of any kind. We made up this arbitrary unit that is affecting the delivery of our schools. And I think that you as educators have a divine responsibility to reinvent school so that it's still rigorous, but so that our kids can prove themselves in different and alternate ways. For example, think about a student who's had incredible hardship, but who's been working your program of going to family therapy every day and is really winning and learning an incredible amount. What if that student could write about their experience and we could assign them credit for that? Why does the Carnegie unit have to be only in certain things? So that, I guess what I'm saying is I would invite all educators to think about how to use the resources and pull the levers that you have in front of you, though they may be limited, to make sure that the most important things, kids learning, kids developing resilience, kids actuating their fullest potential, can be achieved. And I think you have the right to do that as an educator.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And powerful words there. At the end of the day, take what you got, use the resources that you have available in front of you. What is it? Make lemonade out of lemon, whatever the,
Well,
you know
and
what I'm saying.
kids are so deserving of that. And I've never met a student who didn't, when given the right sunlight and the right water and the right soil, I've never met a student not thrive. So it is our job to provide those 3 simple things every day, no matter what's going on in your mailbox. That has to be done. That has to be priority 1.
Yep. Whew. Well, Kelly, if we got some folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
Probably to send me an email at Kelly, Kelly, at Freire Schools, Freire schools.org. Love to hear from you.
Thank you again. Once again, I have Dr. Kelly Davenport with us today. Kelly, you have clearly shown me a lot of things to think about, and I'm glad that we have a favorite book in common. So that's awesome to know as well. And I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for taking a stand about equity for every one of our kids. Appreciate you.